Chapter 39 to 47. It was time. Gine had never made a false moon before, but she'd seen Bardock make one plenty of times. Frisia thought so highly of his transformations, but he'd forgotten that scions transformed too, and that was going to be his downfall. She was done playing around anyway. She'd toyed with the Galactic Emperor, played him like a yo-yo on a string, and now she was ready to end him. He'd killed her people. She hadn't always liked them, hadn't always been like them. But they were hers, even if she hadn't always been theirs. She was a scion. At least one scion had acknowledged that. And she owed it to him, at least, to kill Frisia once and for all. Gine held out her hand, and what? A ball of ki appeared over her palm, but it was just a ball of energy. It didn't look right. Green, it had always been green. How did you make your ki a different color? And there had been something about waves, Bardock had said, but she'd been 17 and staring dreamily at his lips, not listening to the words coming out of them. Damn! It mixed with the atmosphere, that was the secret, it burst open all at once and the ki mixing with the atmosphere created a reaction. But what type of ki? Mix it how? Gine worked her fingers, the ball of ki flickering through the rainbow, going out and sparking to life again. Nothing. She'd forgotten. She'd never known how. She'd never thought she'd need to know. Frisia, who had been watching all this with a nasty grin, phased forward and buried his fist in her gut, and the tiny ball of ki in her hand fizzled and went out. Man, if you hadn't been so hungry, maybe you would have beat Jackie Chun. Krillin said. Nah. Kakarot shook his head. I think I still woulda lost, that old guy was great. That's right. Master Roshi interjected quickly. Remember, both of you, no matter how strong you get, there's always someone stronger than you out there. Kakarot had known exactly who he meant. Gine sagged to her knees, clutching her stomach. Frisia's distorted grin grew wider. Kakarot watched, enraged, as the Emperor began to give back every wound Gine had given him with interest. Kakarot ground his teeth. If only he could help. If only she could go Oozuru, wait. That's what she had been doing. She'd been trying to make a moon. But she didn't know how, and neither did he. Vegeta. He whirled on the prince. Make that light. The fake moon. If she goes Oozuru she can still beat him. But the prince sneered. Clearly none of you understand what a super scion is. Let me demonstrate. And the fool prince flew toward Frisia with every ounce of his strength concentrated in his fist, screaming a battle cry. Frisia, busy battering Gine with his tail while holding her aloft by the neck, merely reached out with his free hand and flicked Vegeta away without looking. The prince sailed backwards, coming to rest with a crash at Kakarot's feet. The entire exchange had taken 3/4 of a second. Now do you get it? Kakarot leaned over him, exasperated. Hurry up and make the moon. Only you know how. Vegeta sat up slowly, holding a hand to the mark on his forehead where Frisia's fingers had made contact. He was staring slack-jawed at the carnage going on in front of him. All this time, he whispered. He was. All this time. Vegeta began to tremble, and for the second time that day tears began streaming from his eyes. Krillin made a noise of disgust. What happened to all that bravado just now, Your Highness? But Vegeta was too terrified to respond. Kakarot took him by the scruff of his neck and shook him, hoping to snap him out of it, but he only let himself be shaken, still staring at Frisia dismantling Gine. Krillin flung up his hands. Well, he's a lost cause. If none of you are going to help her, I will. Gohan shouted, running at Frisia. Kakarot yelled for him to stop, but it was Chi-Chi who flung out an arm to bar his way. No, Gohan, she said, and for the first time in several minutes she took her eyes off the fight. She looked at Kakarot. You need to help her. Kakarot gaped at her. I can't. Chi-Chi inflated with rage, and turned her back on the combatants completely to march up to her husband. What do you mean, you can't? You're strong enough to help. You're strong enough to end this right now. She doesn't want me to. His wife's nostrils flared dangerously. Behind his general terror at the situation, and even behind the specific terror of his wife being mad at him, Kakarot couldn't help but appreciate the sight of Chi-Chi at the full height of her fury. And how do you know that? She growled through clenched teeth. He shrugged helplessly. I just know. Who cares what she wants? Chi-Chi shouted. She's going to die getting what she wants. Is that what you want? Kakarot shook his head slowly. Chi-Chi didn't understand. How to make her understand? She doesn't need my help, he shot back, his voice almost a yell. She was stronger than him. She had always been stronger than him. She would always be stronger than him. Oh, maybe someday she would get old and retire, but probably not. Master Roshi was a couple hundred years old and used a walking stick, but he was still one of the most dangerous humans in existence. His ma couldn't, she wouldn't ever. Out of the corner of his eye Kakarot saw Frisia fling Gine to the ground. Gine did not get up. Well, that's that I suppose, Frisia said, and raised a hand. The tips of all 5 of his fingers began to glow red. Gine moaned but did not rise. No, a calm, distant part of his brain thought, even as the rest of his body moved automatically. Ma can't lose. There's always someone stronger out there. Kakarot stood in front of his mother and deflected the blasts, sending them sailing into the ocean. The water exploded with steam, and the 3 of them were drenched with hot rain. Frisia raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what are you? Kakarot stared down the nightmare of his mother's people. If she couldn't fight him, then he would. I'm a scion from Earth, he said. Frisia curled his lips back over his distended mouth in a parody of a smile. I really need to invest in some pest control, he said. Since I seem to have failed at it so profoundly. You know what they say, Kakarot said, getting into his strongest stance. If at first you don't succeed. Frisia laughed. Oh, this is going to be fun. Kakarot agreed. From where she lay, all Gine could see was Kakarot's boots, and then even they disappeared as he charged at Frisia. The noise of their battle, even more intense than hers, sounded all around her as the 2 of them clashed. With effort she rolled onto her stomach. Breathed. Braced herself. Got her knees under her. And that was all she had strength for. Because she was weak. Her breathing sped up in rage or frustration or sorrow, she couldn't tell. She'd had him. And then she hadn't. And Kakarot had had to step in. Like Bardock always had. Because she'd always been weak. All that training, all those Zenkais, that boost from the Grand Elder. What was the point of it all if she couldn't kill the one person whose death really mattered? She might as well have stayed home on Earth and grown rhubarb. Better than coming all the way out here only to have her inadequacies shoved in her face again. Because she was weak, and always would be. She raised her head and watched her son fight her battle for her. With the ease of a dancer Kakarot dodged and leapt around the battlefield, his movements perfectly timed, always one step ahead of Frisia. His punches were devastating, his kicks crisp and precise. He moved like someone completely at ease in his body, someone completely in control. Someone who loved to fight. Gine could still feel the sick need pulsing under her skin, but it was more about vengeance than joy. If she could have held a gun to Frisia's head and killed him that way, she would in a heartbeat. But even in the most desperate circumstances, Kakarot fought like there was nothing he'd rather be doing. He was skilled. He was strong. And he always would be. Despair welled up inside her, overriding her fatigue, and she pounded the ground with her fist. The earth cracked and shattered at the blows, but she barely saw it through the hot, angry tears in her eyes. What good was she? What good was all the training she'd done? The battlefield belonged to other people, not her. Never her. Piccolo had nearly beaten her. Vegeta had been miles out of her league. Frisia was always one step ahead of her. What was she doing here? She struck the ground one more time, and then the despair ebbed as quickly as it had flowed, taking the rest of her strength with it. She lowered her head again, utterly spent. Kakarot would make short work of the Emperor and then they would go home. And she would tend to her garden, and always she would know that it was Bardock's blood that made their son strong, not hers. The noise of battle stopped, and Gine raised her head in time to see Frisia, now in a smaller, sleeker form, point a finger at Kakarot's chest and fire. Grandpa Gohan sat on the beach next to Kame House. He looked up when he noticed Gine. It's coming, he said. She said, what is? He pointed at the sea. She looked, and instead of water saw only light. What is it? She asked. Fear, he said. Suffering. Rage. There's so much of it, she said. He said, yes. The light began rising, pouring its way up the beach and lapping at her ankles. Gine shivered and looked at Gohan. I'm frightened, she told him. He turned to her, his face burnt and black with the heat of the light that engulfed him. I know. The light was still rising, faster and faster, a flood. She tipped her head back as it rose above her shoulders. The heat was unbearable. She felt her skin prickle and peel. This would not kill her, she knew. But she might want it to, before the end. The light slipped past her chin, filled her mouth, her nose, her ears, closed soundlessly over her head. There was nothing but light. Nothing but burning. Nothing remained but that. Kakarot fell back, gasping in pain at the hole in his chest. Frisia had transformed again, and even though he'd done it twice before, Kakarot still hadn't been prepared for the massive jump in power. If this wasn't the last one, they were all dead for sure. They might all be dead anyway. Even Kaioken times 20 hadn't been enough. A scream echoed out across the plains. Kakarot's head snapped around to look at the source. His mother was standing, shaking with rage, her energy spiraling up and up, the clouds above her swirling in response, the water near her feet lapping furiously at its bounds. As he watched, her hair and eyes began to glow white-hot. She screamed again, and for a moment, Kakarot did not recognize his mother. Then she went still, her energy somehow suddenly 50 times more massive than it had been moments before. Kakarot, clutching at the hole in his chest, sat up and stared. Her hair wasn't white-hot anymore, but it was still light, somehow. Her eyes too. She looked eerie, not like herself. With slow, measured steps, she began walking toward Frisia, who had completely lost interest in Kakarot. Emma. Kakarot wheezed as she walked past him, but Gine gave no indication that she'd heard him. She just continued walking toward Frisia. What's this? Frisia mocked. Have you finally accepted your fate? Gine kept walking. Frisia frowned. What's the matter, monkey? Fear got your tongue. She kept walking. Frisia curled his lip and raised a finger, shooting her with the same ultra-concentrated red beam he'd hit Kakarot with. Without flinching or turning aside, Gine backhanded the beam away, sending it crashing into a rock formation where it detonated. Wah! Frisia took a step back and fired again, but again Gine sent it flying. He fired again, and each time Gine knocked it away. Finally she reached him, and she snatched up his hand in hers and bent it backwards at the wrist until something snapped. Frisia screamed. It was the first real damage he'd taken. Seemingly energized by the intense pain, Frisia leaped away from Gine, but she left an after-image where she'd been and appeared behind him, knocking him to the ground. Frisia recovered quickly and shot straight up into the air. Gine followed him, and they clashed in midair, two tiny specks spiraling around the sky and knocking into each other, each clash an outpouring of energy potent enough to shatter planets. Kakarot saw movement out of the corner of his eye, which turned out to be Gohan carrying Dend. The child had his hands outstretched, and he didn't even wait for Gohan to put him down before the glow of healing lit up. Kakarot felt the hole in his chest begin to knit itself together, and once his lungs were functioning again he took a breath and stood up. Gohan, take the others and go to the ship. It's too dangerous for you to be here. But Grandma's still hurt. Gohan protested. I know, kiddo, Kakarot said. But she isn't herself right now. All three of them looked at the battle, which was barely visible even to Kakarot's eyes. Mountains crumbled at every blow, stray ki blasts caused rifts in the ocean floor which in turn caused floods and tsunamis. To the boys he supposed it looked like the landscape was being torn to shreds by invisible specters. Kakarot heard Dend gulp audibly. He took both boys by the shoulders and gently turned them to face him. It's going to be fine, I promise, he said with more bravado than certainty. They both nodded reluctantly. Now go to the ship and get ready to take off if you need to. He looked over at Chi-Chi, who had just arrived. He caught her arms before she could grab him and spoke over her. Go with them, Chi-Chi. Her eyes sparked dangerously. Don't be stupid, I'm not leaving you. Far away one of the tiny figures knocked the other into an island, destroying it in an instant. Chi-Chi, please. Kakarot squeezed his wife's arms, willing her to just do as he asked for once. I don't know what's gotten into Ma. I don't want her hitting you on accident. Chi-Chi hesitated. She would never do that. Chi-Chi. Kakarot resisted the urge to shake her. The wild, vengeful ki he could feel pouring off his mother was scaring him to death, and he didn't know how it wasn't doing the same to his wife. Chi-Chi flung Kakarot's arms off her. Ugh. Fine. I'll get the kids to safety. But you'd better not do anything stupid, do you hear me? She jabbed a finger directly at the spot that moments ago had been a gaping hole, and then whirled on her heel and gathered Gohan and Den to her. The three of them took off. You too, Krillin, Kakarot said, turning back to the battle. Krillin had arrived just after Chi-Chi and been watching everything silently. Not happening, he said. Krillin, Kakarot growled, but Krillin chuckled darkly. I'm not your kid and I'm not your wife. You can't tell me what to do. A mountain on the very edge of the horizon exploded. Kakarot gave a bitter laugh. You saying I can tell Chi-Chi what to do? Krillin snorted. Kakarot shook his head helplessly. Fine Krillin, but then do me a favor. If things get bad, make sure Gohan and Chi-Chi take off. You know Chi-Chi won't go if she thinks she's leaving me behind. And she won't leave unless I make her, which means going with her anyway. You're a tricky guy, Kakarot. A massive beam struggle lit up the sky for just a moment and then faded, minutes worth of effort expended in a single second. Alright, Krillin said. But only if things get really bad. Kakarot prayed they wouldn't. He knew in his gut they would. Mother? Where is Aspa? Kiru turned from where she stood by the window, still dressed in her armor. It was the only time Gine ever saw her mother look at her with something other than disappointment. Aspa is dead, she said. In battle? 3-year-old Gine asked innocently. But her mother wouldn't be looking like that if her friend had died with honor. No, Kira said. Frisia killed her. Gine remembered blinking, trying to figure out if her mother had said something else really, and she had only misunderstood. Why? She said eventually. Kira sighed, curling and uncurling her tail in agitation. But other than that she was still. Who knows? He does that sometimes. Does what sometimes? Kiru looked at her daughter, eyes crying blood. Kills us. Gine asked what she thought was the obvious question. Then why don't we kill him? Her mother laughed. Frisia staggered, forced back by Gine's fists. Her mother was still laughing. Frisia's blood stained her hands, and her mother laughed and laughed and laughed. So far, every time Frisia's power had increased, he needed to transform to do it. But this time, after spending a few minutes getting pummeled by Gine, he simply found some breathing space and powered up, and just like that he was on top again. Krillin swore. What the hell is up with this guy? Kakarot ground his teeth. His mother was now more powerful than he'd ever dared dream of reaching, but she was also badly hurt. Her left boot squelched blood from a wound in her leg, and every time she screamed she spat blood. He had wanted desperately to let Den heal her, but he couldn't risk the boy's life like that, not with his mother the way she was now. Whatever power she had unlocked had come at the cost of her sanity. And it had all been in vain. Things were back in Frisia's favor now, him, bleeding power like he had an infinite supply, her, furious, unfocused and dying. Kakarot thought quickly. He had barely been able to touch Frisia even at Kaioken times 20, and doing that had drained so much energy he'd been nearly unable to move. Increasing the multiplier would probably be outright suicide. There was the spirit bomb. But Namek was so empty of life he wasn't sure how much it would yield. Maybe if he gathered energy from nearby planets as well. You know, I feel rather foolish, Frisia called. Kakarot snapped to attention. The battle had come to a lull only yards from where he stood with Krillin. If this is all there is to the legendary Super Saiyan, then I should never have killed you all. Gine snorted like a bull. Veins stood out along her neck and face. Blood spurted weakly from the wound in her leg. Frisia bowed. You fought well, Gine. Hearing his mother's name in the mouth of this horror made Kakarot feel sick. Frisia straightened. But this is where it ends. He raised a finger. Gine tensed. His fingertip glowed. She charged. Frisia fired. Gine met the beam straight on. It lanced through her heart and was gone. Gine's fist landed. Frisia didn't even flinch. Her fist slid down his face as she collapsed in a heap at his feet. Dead. Kakarot breathed in, and the sound was so loud it hurt his ears. Dead? No. Limp. Motionless. Silent. But dead? Was she? Everything was silent. The world held its breath. And Kakarot screamed. Mama? Is Grandpa Gohan a Saiyan? Ha, no sweetie. He's an Earthling. And, we're not. No. We're from a different planet. Which one? Where is it? It's called Vegeta. It isn't anywhere anymore. It got destroyed. The whole planet? Yes. Right after you were born. What happened? We took a spaceship and came here. But... I mean, how did it get destroyed? Mama? Someone named Frisia destroyed it. But don't you worry about him. He doesn't know where we are. He'll never find us. We're safe here. Okay. We're safe. Oh, okay. We're safe. You remember that? Yes, Mama. Kakarot raised his eyes from his mother, Frisia's cat-like grin coming into focus over her limp form. He stared at the tyrant in vacant horror for exactly one heartbeat and then, as he had done so many times in his life, Kakarot followed his mother's example. He screamed, the sound coming from a place deep in his soul. He let the rage take him, as it had taken his mother, and in surrendering to it, he found himself buoyed up by it. Power, the likes of which he had never imagined before today, rushed up inside him, filling and filling and filling and spilling over and never stopping. He felt hot, the overflowing ki emanating off his skin as raw heat. The wild energy threatened to carry him off with it, but Kakarot resisted. Krillin, he shouted. Get Ma to the ship and take off. When Krillin failed to do so immediately, Kakarot screamed, now. While I can still control myself. Chanting under his breath, Krillin ran up to Frisia. Frisia smirked and pointed a finger at him. Instantly, Kakarot was there. He grabbed Frisia in a full Nelson, and held him in place while Krillin scooped up his mother's body, he prayed it wasn't her dead body, and flew away. Once Krillin was away, Kakarot released Frisia, who immediately turned around. Goodness gracious, not you too. With his eyes, Kakarot watched Frisia. With his energy he felt Krillin moving toward Chi-Chi and the kids. Once they were all safely away, then he could let loose. Until then he needed to keep it together. Is this really the legendary Super Saiyan transformation? Again? Frisia wondered aloud. I was given to understand it only happens once every 1,000 years. Of course, I was also given to understand it was a threat to me, and we both saw how that turned out. Kakarot seethed. He understood now. He was stronger than Ma like normal, so he was stronger than her in this form as well. He'd be able to kill Frisia easily. If only Ma had just focused on her training, she could have done it herself, but no. The rage threatened to overwhelm him and he pushed it back. Just a few more moments and he'd be able to let go, but not yet. Does this form deprive all you Scions of your ability to speak? It's getting quite irritating the way you go all silent like that. Frisia shook his head. No matter. I'll kill you just the same. No, you won't, Kakarot growled. Frisia raised an eyebrow. Oh, you do speak. Then perhaps you can tell me why you're standing there like you have a chance when you saw what happened to the other one. The other one? Krillin was at the ship. They just had to take off. Then Frisia could die. Are you talking about my mother? That was your mother. Well, that explains why you were screaming like that. I would apologize, but we didn't exactly have time for introductions. Is this, he gestured at Kakarot's hair, and the entirety of him, something you've always been able to do, or is it new? Chi-Chi's ki grew agitated and did not move. Kakarot ground his teeth and lightning bolts snapped to the ground around him. He felt like a twig spinning in an eddy at the top of a waterfall. He hadn't fallen over the edge yet, but when he did it would be disastrous. Well, alright, if the conversation is just going to come and go we might as well wrap things up. Goodbye, monkey. Frisia shot a death beam and Kakarot slapped it away. Frowning, Frisia shot another one. Again Kakarot parried it. He was about to fly into a million pieces and he clenched every muscle in his body to keep from doing so. Frisia muttered something under his breath, but Kakarot didn't hear. They were finally taking off. The little group of key signatures was rising steadily away from the planet's surface. Distantly Kakarot became aware that Frisia had punched him. WHWH. What is this? Frisia hissed, shaking out his fist. I've seen the limits of this form for myself. This isn't possible. The others safely gone, Kakarot turned his full attention on Frisia. This is for everyone you killed. I beg your pardon. Kakarot punched Frisia so hard he felt bone crack under his fist. Frisia went flying, and Kakarot phased into his trajectory and slammed him into the ground. He peppered the tyrant with ki blasts, Frisia's body jerking with every hit. This is for the seance. He landed hard next to Frisia and grabbed him by the tail. Frisia was powerless to stop him as he spun him around and around, finally releasing him to fly head over tail into the sky and out of sight. Kakarot whispered, "And this is for my ma." He cupped his hands beside him. Me. He could feel Frisia up there, outside the atmosphere, somehow still alive. His power was rising again. Me. But it didn't matter. Kakarot was stronger. He would always be stronger. This nightmare was over. Frisia just didn't know it yet. Kakarot thrust his hands out before him, radiant blue energy coursing from them in a beam so massive he couldn't see around it. He felt it hit Frisia, felt him struggle, felt him resist. Felt him die. But Kakarot didn't stop. He didn't know if he was so angry he didn't want to stop, or if he was simply unable to stop. He just kept firing until there was nothing left. Empty, he fell to his knees, and felt the fiery ki that had sustained him fall away. Gine stood outside her cottage, trying to keep her footing inside a whirling vortex of flame. Bardock saw her and grinned. He lifted his hands, gesturing to the entirety of her. "Babe, look at you." She gulped down a sob. "I can't do it. I can't handle all this power." He snorted, still grinning. "You're a scion. Course you can." She felt tears like fire running down her cheeks. "I can't. I'm not like you. I'm not strong." He reached out and put his hands on her hips like he always used to, steadying her. "You are. You're stronger than me now. You don't see my hair turning gold, do you? Damn, you look good." She clutched his arms, and the skin where her fingers curled around him sizzled and smoked. "You don't understand. I'm not a scion. I'm just an earthling who was raised on Vegeta." Bardock leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a gesture he had never, ever made in life. "Good enough for me." And she woke up. Gine lay, just breathing. It felt like the morning after a fever. She could hear voices raised in argument, but she didn't care. She dreamed of Bardock. She hadn't dreamed about him in almost a decade. Why now? And, was she happy to have seen him? Or did he just remind her of? One of the raised voices was Vegeta's, and Gine heaved herself out of bed without conscious thought. Everything flooded back to her, Zarbon and Dodoria, Frisia, her own madness, and she had Vegeta's throat in her hand before she knew where she was. "Ma. Ms. Gine. Grandma." Everyone sounded so worried. She looked around and saw them, Chi-Chi, Krillin, Gohan, even dear little Dend, all staring at her in concern and horror. Which was confusing. She felt fine. Doubtless Dend had healed her while she slept. She remembered vaguely her body going to pieces around her, but it was a distant sensation by now. Vegeta struggled and she tightened her grip. "Ma, don't you dare," Chi-Chi said sharply. Gohan stood on his toes in anxiousness. "Grandma, you can't kill him, we promised him safe passage." Gine was confounded. "Why did you do that?" "He said he'd kill us if we didn't take him," Gohan answered solemnly. "We took him, so he's not going to kill us. He gave his word." "But I can kill him," Gine reminded them. "But you shouldn't." Chi-Chi snapped. Gine stared at her, her brain churning in slow circles as she tried to figure out what Chi-Chi meant by that. "Please, ma'am," Krillin said, arms out placatingly, "I know you hate him, but cold-blooded murder is going a little far, don't you think?" He was chuckling nervously, and all of a sudden Gine's brain put the pieces together. This was an earthling thing. They didn't kill just because it got them what they wanted. They didn't torment the weak just because they could. Her brain moving through molasses, she recalled conversations with Grandpa Gohan, long hours into the night spent discussing good and evil, vengeance and mercy, fighting without killing. It had taken her a long time to understand. It had all seemed so silly. Silly, but good. She dropped Vegeta. The prince fell to his knees, coughing and gagging. Gohan ran up to her and hugged her legs, and she knelt and hugged him back so tightly she was sure she was hurting him. But he clung to her just as tightly and made no complaint. When Kakarot came to, he found Nail standing over him. "Are you able to fly?" the Namekian asked. Wincing, Kakarot stood. He felt like he was 100 years old, but he nodded. Nail lifted into the air. "Come." They flew back to the Grand Elder's house. Nail, not talkative to begin with, was stony in his silence. When they entered the house, Kakarot understood why. The Grand Elder was dying. Well, done. Kakarot. Grand Elder, save your strength. The panic in Nail's voice was subtle but palpable. The Grand Elder smiled weakly. It is my time, child. Be strong. He breathed for several moments, each breath sounding like it would be his last. Eventually he opened his eyes and looked at Nail. Muri will be my successor. Nail took in a shaky breath. Yes, Grand Elder. The Grand Elder closed his eyes, and never opened them again. Nail did not weep. He bared his ferocious teeth and his breathing became halting and juddery, but he shed no tears. Gradually the Grand Elder faded until the chair he'd sat in the entire time Kakarot had known him was empty. Still Nail did not cry. Kakarot realized belatedly that so long as he was here, Nail couldn't cry. I'm sorry, he murmured, and clapped Nail on the shoulder once before leaving the building. He stood outside the door for a moment, and then rose into the air, wondering what to do next. He knew he should feel something, maybe sad that the Grand Elder was gone, or happy that Frisia was gone. And, well, he did. But mostly what he felt was hungry. He realized he was famished at almost the same moment he spotted several large shadows moving under the surface of a nearby body of water. A few minutes later Kakarot was feasting on 2 large fish, cooked with ghee and seasoned with hunger. Once he devoured them he rose into the air again in search of more food, but then he spotted a strange shape in the distance, something unnatural. As he flew closer he realized it was probably the ship Frisia had arrived on. Curiously, Kakarot walked up the gangplank. Hello. His voice echoed, but there was no response. He wandered from room to room, noting with vague interest the various screens and computer banks and weapons depots. Finally he came to a room with a sink and racks of armor like what all the Frisia soldiers had been wearing. Kakarot looked down at himself. He was filthy, covered in blood and dirt and sweat, his clothes torn to ribbons. He shrugged and stripped, washing himself in the sink. In one of the cupboards he found a body suit that looked roughly his size and put it on. It was light and stretchy, almost as good as being naked. Satisfied, he started for the door, wondering if there was any food to be had, when a rack of armor caught his eye and he stopped. Thoughtfully, Kakarot took one of the chest pieces down and after a few tries managed to force it on over his head. Then he stood in front of the mirror again, frowning slightly. Was this what his pa had looked like? Ma always said he looked just like his father, but Chi-Chi said he had his ma's eyes, so how much like him was he really? Kakarot tried frowning, baring his teeth, smirking, squinting his eyes. None of it made him look like anyone but himself. If anything, he looked a little more like Vegeta in this armor. Vegeta. Where had he scuttled off to? Kakarot continued his search for food, but once he found the ration stores he gathered an armful and stuffed them into his armor. Then he opened one and flew away from the ship, trying to sense Vegeta's ki. Hours later he'd gone through all the rations, none of which were good, though one tasted almost, if he closed his eyes and used his imagination really hard, like a blueberry muffin, but there was still no sign of Vegeta. However, as he flew he passed over the battleground where he and Ma had fought Jinyu. That had been weird. Being in another body, but also seeing Ma as a great ape. She hadn't been one in so long he'd forgotten how strange she got. He barely remembered his own times in the form, just nightmarish impressions of immense size and rage he was glad to forget. Something glinted as he flew overhead, and he landed, finding an intact pod. The other 4 had been smashed flat, but this one was only partially buried. He reached out and touched it, and the door forced its way open with a hiss. Kakarot peered inside. There was no way to tell which member of the Jinyu force had used this craft. It looked the same as the pod he had carried to Dr. Brief's months before, the one he and Ma had come to Earth in. This was the same kind of vessel that had carried his Ma and Pa around the galaxy so long ago. What had it been like, sitting in a small enclosed space for so long? What had his Ma thought about, isolated from the rest of the universe? Kakarot bent down and climbed inside, turning awkwardly in the small space. He sat, and found that the seat was rather comfortable actually. It was softer than it looked and supportive too. He wriggled into it, trying to imagine his Ma flying around the galaxy like this, ready to... To what? She had been a scion. And what did scions do? She had told him, in no uncertain terms. And she'd never said she hadn't done the same. He'd seen her, just now, wrathful and bloodthirsty even before the strange transformation had taken her mind. All it had taken was a few battles and his ma had become a hardened, vengeful nightmare, like the kind, laughing, gentle person who had raised him had never existed in the first place. Maybe she never had. Viciously, Kakarot forced these thoughts away, and he slammed his hands down to either side of him to lever himself out of the pod. But before he could get his weight under him, the door hissed and swung shut. Frantically, he pushed at the door, realizing belatedly he'd brought his hand down on a big red button. Pushing it again did nothing. Something hissed, and he suddenly felt sleepy. The last words Kakarot remembered before everything went black was, "Cryo sleep initiated." Coming back to life was a strange sensation, Kaiatsu thought. It felt a little like a sneeze, but backwards. It was still not the most surreal thing to happen to him lately. That would be watching His Holiness the Guardian of Earth get bawled out by a giant ogre behind a desk. King Kai had been funny, though. And he had taught Tien a new technique. He'd offered to teach it to Kaiatsu too, but Kaiatsu had declined. He knew where his limits lay. It was enough that Tien got to keep training. Being dead hadn't been so bad, all in all. But he was mighty glad to be back alive. He and Tien celebrated in the barren wasteland where they'd been revived, but after a few minutes they felt Cammy coming towards them. They turned to wish him joy as well, but he was flying with speed and purpose, and his face was serious. "Tien. Kaiatsu," he called as he flew overhead. "Follow me. We have urgent business." With only a glance at each other, Tien and Kaiatsu rose into the air and did as Cammy bid. "What is it, Cammy?" Tien called as they sped toward the ocean. "If I am alive again," Cammy said grimly, "then that means my counterpart is as well." Tien and Kaiatsu glanced at each other again in alarm, and asked no more questions. Soon they arrived at Kame House, and Kaiatsu remembered Rashi had planned to bury the rice cooker on his island, in the hopes that he could protect it. As they approached, a loud squealing bombarded their ears. They landed on the beach and rushed toward the house, but before they got there a body was hurled out the window with a loud crash. The person that landed on the sand wore a Hawaiian print shirt, Master Rashi. "Oolong," he shouted. "Get that blasted rice." He dissolved into loud hacking coughs, and as Kaiatsu ran toward him he could see the front of his shirt was soaked with blood. Rashi saw the three of them and smiled painfully. "Thank goodness." The old master closed his eyes and sighed, but before Kaiatsu could check for a pulse, the door slammed open and Oolong ran squealing from the house, a rice cooker held over his head. When he saw Tien and Cammy he dumped it at their feet without stopping and made a wide circle around the back of the house. As he rounded the corner, the door slammed open again, and from it emerged the gigantic form of Demon King Piccolo. Kaiatsu had never seen him in person, had in fact only ever heard him described, but the words, 8 feet tall, did nothing to convey the sheer size of the monster that ducked through the doorway of the little pink house. He looked like Cammy, but older and more nasty, and when he caught sight of his counterpart he stopped and grinned. "There you are," he said. "I suppose you've come to stop me." "Indeed," Cammy said with, to Kaiatsu at least, remarkable calm. Piccolo grinned wider. "Being dead was very instructive, you know. I learned quite a lot during my time in hell. I imagine I'm as strong as you've managed to become in my absence. I wonder if you have the guts to face me yourself. Or are you once again going to let other hands get dirty in your place?" "I will take care of you myself, rest assured," Cammy said, still serene. "But I have learned things too, these past few years. One of them might interest even you." Piccolo opened his mouth, obviously to deny any interest in what Cammy had to say, but Cammy finished with, "I have at last learned where we came from," and Piccolo snapped his mouth shut. The two Namekians regarded each other warily. Kaiatsu took the opportunity to check Rashi's pulse, weak, but steady. He placed pressure on the wound, using telekinesis on the areas his hands couldn't cover, and let Tien's gentle telepathy distract him from the squelchy mess under his fingers. Rashi would probably live, if they could get him to a hospital. Why was Cammy just standing there talking? "We come from a planet full of beings just like us," Cammy said, and the emotion in his voice was palpable. "We have a people, Piccolo. A home we came from. A home that cast us out," Piccolo shouted. "A people that abandoned us. Don't seek to distract me with sentiment, Cammy, not when you kept all such things for yourself and left me with only ambition and cruelty. I will rule this world as I have always planned, and I will not let you stand in my way." He leaped forward, and without flinching Cammy raised his hands in the air and shouted, "Mafubie." Instantly Piccolo was caught up in a torrent of swirling green energy. Tien knelt swiftly and popped open the rice cooker, and Cammy lowered his hands in a sweeping gesture, channeling the stretched-out specter of King Piccolo down into the empty bowl. The lid slammed shut. "The charm," Tien called. "Where is the charm?" "Ket," Rashi wheezed. Kaiatsu reached into his shirt pocket with telekinesis and floated the piece of paper, spattered with blood, but still legible, over to the rice cooker and slapped it on. The rice cooker rattled once, and then fell still. The whole island let out its collective breath. Oolong poked his snout around the corner of the house. "Did we win?" Later, at the hospital, Rashi looked cannily at Cammy, who was sitting demurely in a folding chair wearing a hasty disguise. Oolong had let him borrow his baseball cap which read, "Hot Buns," in big red letters, and he was borrowing one of Rashi's collared shirts. He returned Rashi's gaze with politeness. "Yes?" "You tried to talk to him," he said. Cammy looked away. Rashi smiled from where he lay with his thin, bony torso swathed in bandages. Kaiatsu didn't like to see the old master looking so frail, but he was watching God with a knowing twinkle in his eye. Thinking maybe he's not a demon after all. "Now that you know who you really are." Cammy sighed impatiently. "He's a demon, all right. His victims still wander the afterlife, unable to find rest. Demons can be made, as well as born, after all. Then why reason with him?" Rashi pointed out. "Why even try?" Kaiatsu sipped his orange juice as quietly as he could, watching unblinking as Cammy looked pensively out the window for several moments. "Perhaps," he said eventually, in a voice so low Kaiatsu had to strain to hear, "I was hoping it was not I that had made him into a demon, but himself. That he was not, as I had long believed, a vessel for the dark cast-offs of my soul, but another, separate being of his own. One that could," he nodded at Rashi, "be reasoned with." "And now?" Rashi asked, his eyes still twinkling. Cammy looked up at the ceiling, eyes tracing the outline of an old water stain. "I don't know," he said. A week later, when the ship containing Yamcha, Bulma, and 83 Namekians landed at Capsule Corp, Kaiatsu watched Cammy stand stoically by as Bulma did crowd control and made introductions. To anyone who didn't know him well, he looked impassive, even forbidding. But to Kaiatsu, who had trained with him for a year and spent part of his afterlife with him, he just looked nervous. The Namekians pouring off the ship didn't seem to care either way. "Brother," they greeted. "Cousin. Well met, son of Katats." Hug and handshakes, crowds and questions, Cammy grew more stony through it all, clearly overwhelmed. He didn't even flinch when a small boy perched himself on his shoulders and held on by his antennae. Now, everyone, give him some space." An older Namekian, portly and kind-faced, waved off the pressing crowd of eager Namekians and faced Cammy. "Greetings, cousin. I am Muri. May I know your name?" Cammy blinked, shifting his grip on his staff. "I have no name." A ripple of confused murmurs echoed through the crowd, and he looked even more nervous. "I go by Cammy, here." "I see," said Muri warmly. "I am given to understand you do not remember your past, is that correct?" Cammy nodded. Muri put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I may not know your name, my friend, but I believe I know the name of your parent." Cammy blinked rapidly, but otherwise did not react. Muri went on. "Our grand elder told me of a Namekian, long ago, just before the great calamity, that sent his child out into the universe in the hopes that they would survive, even if the rest of our people did not. The name of that Namekian was Katats." "Katats," Cammy repeated in a whisper. Kaiatsu leaned unobtrusively against Tien as they both watched the guardian of Earth cover his eyes with his hand in a futile effort to hide the tears that spilled down his cheeks and dripped off his chin. The entire crowd of Namekians gathered around their long-lost family member, comforting him, welcoming him, claiming him as their own, and Kaiatsu could see, before Cammy was lost to sight in the crowd, that underneath the tears, he was smiling. It had been a little over a month since 83 Namekians had come to live at Capsule Corp, and as of yesterday Yamcha could finally say he knew the names of every single one of them. "Hey, Sumu," he said confidently as the tall, skinny Namekian scurried down the corridor past him. "They're here." Sumu shouted over his shoulder, not stopping for an instant. Lien just spotted them passing Neptune. "They're coming." Yamcha whirled around, nearly spilling his coffee. Lien was the elder in charge of looking through the telescope for any sign that Kakarot and the others had survived. Yamcha felt a grin tug its way across his face as he realized what this meant. Hastily he set down his coffee and followed Sumu out to the courtyard. Apparently the rumor mill traveled fast, because the courtyard was already half full, and as Yamcha skidded to a stop in the center, even more green figures emerged from the building. Within a minute all 83 of them had arrived, all looking hopefully up at the sky. Following shortly after them was Bulma, looking stunning even in a baggy gray jumpsuit, her hands covered in grease stains and still wearing her welding goggles. She pushed them up off her eyes, which she narrowed at Yamcha. "Why didn't you come get me?" she demanded, taking out a capsule and popping it. A hefty telescope appeared and she looked through it, adjusting some knobs. "Sorry, babe," Yamcha said automatically, though he knew she probably wasn't even listening. "I figured you'd." "They're on track to land. The ship looks good, everything appears intact," she said, ignoring him. Yamcha sighed internally. Bulma straightened. "Muri, you've got everything?" The acting elder nodded gravely, hefting a red and white capsule that held medical supplies. Today marked the 4th day after the ship could conceivably have made it back to Earth. 4 days on Namek, during which time literally anything could have happened. And then 34 days in space, in who knows what condition. They had to be prepared for the worst, though the fact that the ship was here at all meant that their very worst fears had been proven wrong. Someone, at least one person, had survived. Less than a minute after Bulma stepped back from the telescope, a thunderclap echoed over the city. Directly above them in the sky they could see a tiny white dot grow rapidly larger until all at once it became the ship which, in the next instant, exploded overhead. The crowd gasped in dismay as chunks of debris and trails of smoke and fire sailed through the air. Yamcha pulled Bulma close to him to shield her, but she wiggled free and pointed up into the sky. "Look!" Yamcha looked. Gohan, Chi-Chi, and Krillin, all curled protectively around Dend and each other, were speeding away from the explosion, but it was a controlled flight. They were all right. But even as they landed in the yard, Bulma still pointed to the sky. Yamcha followed her gaze, and felt his heart jump into his throat. Floating in midair, golden as the sun, terrible and resplendent, was Gine. And hovering in front of her, vicious and angry and almost as terrifying, was Vegeta. Yamcha gulped. Vegeta was yelling something, but it was too far for Yamcha to make out the words. Gine did not reply as she axe-kicked him into the ground. Capsule Corp's lawn cratered where he landed, Namekians scattering out of the way. Instantly Gine was there, a hot wind swirling around her. She was glowing, hair and eyes burning, face rigid with fury. Gohan extricated himself from Chi-Chi's arms and flew toward the combatants, Chi-Chi yelling after him. "Gohan, don't. It's too dangerous." "Grandma." Gohan pushed his way through the force of Gine's aura, his hair whipping around his face, eyes nearly closed. "Grandma. It's okay. We're here, we're home." Yamcha, standing between Bulma and this display, though he could feel her peeking around his arm, saw Vegeta staring up at Gine with an expression that sent shivers down his spine. The prince was furious, a seething helpless anger, but he was also terrified, and the mixture made Yamcha almost, feel sorry for him. Gine leveled a palm at Vegeta and Gohan redoubled his efforts to reach her. "Grandma, don't." He clasped his arms around her neck at the exact moment a white-hot pinpoint of ki appeared in the center of Gine's palm. She froze, her grandson sobbing into her shoulder as Vegeta cowered in front of her. Everyone held their breath for several seconds. Then Gine closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, held it for 4 counts, and then exhaled. A brief but harmless gust of wind traveled outward from her, as though the entire planet was exhaling along with her. Her hair faded to black, and when she opened her eyes they were dark and lucid. The ki blast dissipated, and she raised her hand to Gohan's back, rubbing it comfortingly. Yamcha's shoulders drooped in relief, but before he could truly relax, Vegeta jumped to his feet, eyes burning with their own light. "Howdy!" Gine slammed a hand over his mouth without letting go of Gohan. She didn't start glowing again, but the hatred in her eyes matched Vegeta's. She leaned in and hissed something in his ear, and when she leaned back again, Vegeta dropped to his knees, utterly broken. Without another glance at him, Gohan still in her arms, Gine flew away. Chi-Chi muttered something and flew after them, leaving only Krillin to explain what had just happened. Yamcha stepped over to him to help him to his feet, but he jerked and sent Krillin crashing to the ground again when he heard Bulma's voice saying, "Well, Prince, what do we do with you?" Yamcha spun hastily around to see Bulma standing, hands firmly on her hips, in front of His Royal Highness the Prince of all Scions, who in turn was still kneeling slumped on the ground, looking up at her with a lost expression on his face. Yamcha hurried over. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Bulma asked again. Vegeta hesitated, and then shook his head slightly. Whatever Gine had said to him had leached the spirit right out of him. Yamcha looked sideways at his girlfriend and was amazed to see pity there. "Well, do you want to stay here?" she said. Yamcha choked, and it took him so long to clear his throat that Vegeta spoke before he could. "You offer me hospitality?" He spat the word. "Why?" Bulma snorted. "Hospitality nothing. I want to keep an eye on you. Who knows what you might get up to if I leave you unsupervised." "Babe," Yamcha hissed in her ear. "What are you doing?" "He doesn't have anywhere to go," she said simply, as though that was any kind of explanation. Vegeta stood slowly and eyed the crowd of tense Namekians around him. "Won't they mind?" he asked with a hint of a feral smile. Bulma matched it with a smile of her own. "They're leaving anyway." She turned to Krillin. "Right? You guys killed Frieza, right? Or none of you would be here." "Hey, speaking of which, where's Kakarot?" When the ship came whistling down through the atmosphere, Raditz was more than ready. "Leave this to me, Hatsuka," he said, stretching and bouncing in place. He hadn't been this excited for a fight in a long time. Hatsuka looked at him skeptically. "Are you sure?" the little green Urdration asked. Raditz snorted. "What choice do we have?" Hatsuka's expression soured, and Raditz laughed. "Don't worry. That boost from last time gave me the edge I need. This time will go differently, I promise." "You know we put our trust in you," Hatsuka said, his normally jolly face solemn. "But we are also fond of you, Raditz. Please, take care of yourself." Sobering a little, Raditz gave his friend a nod, and then, placing 2 fingers to his forehead, he disappeared. Leaving his mother on Earth, knowing his only option to keep Vegeta away from her was to run away himself, had been the hardest thing Raditz had ever done. Very quickly, however, he had come up short against the sobering truth that a lone scion wandering the galaxy without the protection of either his companion's fists or Frieza's name was a target too juicy to pass up. Bounty hunters, vengeance seekers, glory hounds, all wanted a piece of him, and Raditz soon found that he had better go into civilization in disguise or not at all. For a while he drifted, aimless, nowhere to go and all the time to get there. His mother's face haunted him those weeks. She had given him a look of such forgiveness that it made his skin itch just to think of it. Raditz was sure she hadn't guessed half the things he'd done, but he was equally sure that if she had, she'd have forgiven him of them too. It was unbearable. But, after weeks spent solo and brooding, Raditz had had an epiphany. There was no changing the past. And there was no changing Gine, who, despite being weak, could be just as stubborn as any other scion. She'd keep forgiving him, over and over, her heart breaking every time. So if he wanted to see her again, see her look at him with something other than that blasted understanding in her eyes, then he had to do something that would change the way she looked at him. He had to make her proud of him instead. Raditz had sat bolt upright in his pod, banging his head on the ceiling. That's it. Genius. He just had to make up for everything he'd ever done. Here he hit a snag, but it was short-lived. He could not undo years spent destroying planets and tormenting the weak, but he could get out there and do the opposite of that, and if he did that enough times, surely that would balance things out and she could stop forgiving him, right? Full of piss and vinegar, Raditz had set out to conquer the galaxy in the name of freedom. And hit another snag. Since he was supposed to be dead, he couldn't exactly show up on a planet scheduled for purging and save it. Anyway, even if he managed to fight off the Frieza soldiers by himself, not a certain prospect, he was sad to say, they'd just send more. Mother's sad, forgiving eyes notwithstanding, directly defying Frieza wasn't on the table. But what other threats were out there? How did one go about saving the galaxy when one was usually the thing the galaxy needed saving from? His first breakthrough had come while he was drinking in a seedy bar outside the jurisdiction of both Frieza and the Galactic Patrol. Some weakling had lost a bet or won a bet or something and was getting hassled by a few lowlives that Raditz, only a month before, would have been glad to call drinking buddies. Now, looking at the world with the eyes of a freedom fighter, he could see that these blockheads were just taking out their frustrations with life on someone who couldn't fight back. Raditz had downed the last of his drink, slammed it on the counter, and started a bar fight. That hadn't exactly been his intention, though starting bar fights was such a habit he was hardly surprised when it happened. But the weakling in question had come out of it with only a few bruises and a hearty sense of gratitude for Raditz. Even better, he'd presented Raditz with his first problem to solve. The man's wife and children were being held for ransom, blah blah blah. The upshot was, there was a sneaky, evil worm out there for Raditz to get rid of, and he did so with gusto. He even freed the worm's other prisoners while he was at it, many of whom also had problems for Raditz to solve. It had taken him several months to sort out everyone's messes, but eventually he had, the galaxy smelling slightly better at the end of it. That had been the beginning. After a while people's gratitude had started adding up, and he'd been able to replace his broken scouter, which had allowed him to find even more people to help. It was exhilarating, this feeling. Fighting and helping people. He hadn't known you could do that. Granted, it took a while for some people to warm up to him. He was still a scion, after all. Some of them never got around to being grateful, and that stung a little. Still, he wasn't doing this for them. He was doing this for Mother. She was going to be so proud. Then his big break, Yardrat. A mystical place where they had discovered the secret of instantaneous travel. Put one in your spaceship and you could go anywhere in the blink of an eye, or so the story went. Raditz's freedom-fighting nose had smelled trouble, and he'd gotten there before a gang of treasure hunters, fending them off and gaining himself a new home in the process. He had never intended to stay in one place for so long. He had always had a taste for travel, and he knew now he always would. But Yardrat had been welcoming, in a way no other place ever had. Even his most grateful clients wasn't the right word, benefactees, had always expected him to leave after he was done saving them. But the Yardratians, with their strange, squishy bodies and simple faces, had been almost aggressive in their kindness. He would stay and learn their secrets, and be fed and clothed and housed, and they wouldn't hear a word said otherwise. And, well, the food was good, and there was always plenty of it. Yardratians ate almost as much as Scions, though they had little else in common. And none of them gave him nasty looks, not even when his back was turned. And there was the training. Ah, the training. Raditz had long ago come to understand, though he would never accept it, that he was weak, and always would be. It was just the way the world was. But even after just a few days spent purifying his spirit, he'd held his scouter up to himself and been amazed to see it click several hundred points higher than it always had. After a month he was in the 5-digit range. After 3 months he stopped using the scouter as anything but a communicator because he could sense everyone's power and he was the strongest being on the planet by a wide margin. Not the most skilled, of course. Master Pibara regularly demonstrated that a clever use of this or that technique could make a weaker fighter a match for a stronger one. Teleport behind someone and strike before they notice you, then teleport away again, make clones or grow in size to intimidate or confuse. Raditz was still at the bottom of the totem pole, but for once he didn't mind. The Yardratians saw his weakness as potential, not failure. It merely showed that he had room to grow. And growing he was. Mother was going to be so proud. Then the genius came. They'd landed without warning, as they always did. As he had always done. Their 5 pods had crashed into a major city, killing thousands instantly and creating chaos. Pibara had turned to Raditz, who was sensing the same mass snuffing out of life that he was, and had asked for his help with tears in his eyes. Of course he'd said yes. And nearly died for it. Raditz had made sure to be in disguise, so the genius hadn't known it was their old punching bag Raditz they were wailing on. But wail on him they did. He put up more of a fight than he ever had before, but one held breath from Guldo and he'd gotten a key blast through the chest. It had hurt so bad he was sure he was about to die. And maybe he would have. But before he did, the genius all stopped what they were doing, listened to their scouters, and then turned and left without a word. Hatsuka had turned up then and healed him, giving Raditz his very first Zenkai. And what a Zenkai! He'd spent the weeks since then training with new fervor. They would be back, he knew. And he would be ready. So when the pod crashed down in exactly the same spot as before, Raditz wasn't afraid. He was eager. This time he knew instant transmission. This time he had power and skill. This time the genius would die. The door to the pod began to open. Raditz stood outside with a key blast ready in his hand. Which one would it be, he wondered. Jis? Rikum? Or Jinyu himself? And why only one? No matter. He, Raditz, would rid the galaxy one and for all of the... Oh, hey, bro. I didn't expect to see you here. The door opened, and when Yamcha saw who was coming through it he flung down the magazine he'd been reading in disgust. Again, he demanded. Bulma looked up from where she had Vegeta's arm draped over her shoulders, clearly struggling with the Scion's weight. She glared. You gonna help me with this or not? Gritting his teeth, Yamcha went and hoisted Vegeta's semi-unconscious form over his own shoulder, freeing his girlfriend of the burden. She paced ahead of them, opening doors for him on the way to the infirmary. Gine again? Yamcha asked tiredly. He could feel the anger pooling in his belly, but he kept a lid on it. Like he always did. Looks like, Bulma said brusquely. I don't think he's going to give up until she either teaches him the damn form or she kills him. I wish she would kill him, Yamcha muttered. His heart pounded for a moment as he waited for Bulma to pounce on him. But she didn't seem to have heard. Come on, short stuff, let's get you patched up. She patted the infirmary bed and busied herself getting out bandages and antiseptic. Yamcha laid the Scion Prince down on the bed and then stood staring at him, the prince moaning in pain and thrashing weakly. No, Lord Frisia, no, I'm S. Yamcha did not miss the look of pity Bulma gave the prince, and that, finally, was the last straw. Bulma, stop. He said it with such force that she actually did stop, staring up at him in surprise, for once giving him her full attention. He took a breath to steady his nerves. You can't keep helping him, Bulma. He's a murderer. I know he's had a hard life, I don't disagree about that, but that doesn't excuse the things he's done. Bulma unceremoniously dropped her armful of medical supplies on a table and crossed her arms over her chest, giving him a dangerous look. Are you saying I should kick him out now, after I promised him a place to stay? After he's been here for months? You didn't promise him anything. Yamcha was horrified to hear his voice rising, but he refused to back down. You don't owe him anything. You certainly don't owe him medical attention. If I didn't take care of him he'd just walk around with broken ribs and bleed everywhere. But Yamcha was shaking his head before she'd even done speaking. Don't act like you're doing this for your own convenience, I know you feel sorry for him. Why shouldn't I feel sorry for him? Bulma's eyes were snapping. He was under the thumb of that tyrant his whole life, of course he's messed up. He killed Kami. Yamcha was definitely shouting now. He killed Tien and Kaiatsu. Your friends, Bulma. My friends. Doesn't that bother you at all? Her eyes slowly grew wide in a dangerous way that meant Yamcha had crossed a line and she was about to let him have it. But Yamcha was beyond caring. For once in their entire lives he was right, and she was wrong, and he was not about to back down. First of all, she said in a low hiss, he didn't kill anyone. That other Scion did all the killing. Second of all, are you talking about Tien? The guy who snapped your leg in two and smiled about it? Something I had to watch, by the way. Is that the Tien you're talking about? Yamcha snarled and turned away, pacing in a tight circle. How did she always do this? Make him look like the bad guy even when he was in the right? Tien changed, Bulma. He made it up to me, to all of us. He put his past behind him and he's a different person now. This one, he thrust his hand in Vegeta's direction, still moaning on the table, hasn't done a damn thing since he got here except torment Gine. Bulma raised an eyebrow. Gine is perfectly capable of defending herself. She shouldn't have to. Yamcha shook his head. And anyway, what difference does it make if he didn't actually kill anyone? He would have. Nappa was killing on his orders. He would have killed me too if Kakarot hadn't shown up. So you're afraid of him? Yamcha stared. She was smirking. His girlfriend was smirking. It was so astonishing he almost forgot to be angry. You think him being here bothers me because I'm afraid of him? Well, aren't you? She looked smug, like she had him all figured out and she was just waiting for him to apologize and admit he was wrong. And she was, for once, so far off the mark that it made him brave. He crossed his arms over his chest and faced her calmly. It's hard to be afraid of somebody who keeps getting his ass kicked. Vegeta gave another pathetic moan. Bulma blinked, the smugness falling off her face. She studied him for a moment, and he let her, his righteous anger buoying him up. Slowly astonishment filled her face in place of the smugness. You don't see him as competition, do you? Yamcha uncrossed his arms in shock. What? She was almost laughing now. You think, what, that I'm going to go all Florence Nightingale on him? Is that what this is about? Oh, sweetie, you don't have anything to worry about. We've been together for over 10 years. You'd think you'd be a bit more secure by now. She clearly meant it. He didn't think for 1 second she was lying. But something about the way she said those words made Yamcha feel, suddenly, very insecure. It hadn't really crossed his mind, that this thing might be romantic in nature. Bulma's parents had a habit of taking in stray animals, and he'd been half expecting her to start picking up the habit herself. That she had chosen to take in a stray alien instead was hardly surprising. This was Bulma after all. But it was also true that she and Vegeta were growing more comfortable with each other. If you could call it that. No, Yamcha thought, comfortable wasn't the right word. He and Bulma were comfortable. They hardly needed to speak to each other anymore, they were so used to each other's routines. By contrast, Bulma said whatever she wanted to the prince, no matter how inflammatory, and the prince said whatever he wanted back. He'd been quiet at first, clearly still reeling from whatever Gine had done to him. But with Bulma's prodding, encouragement, really, he had slowly begun to get his old spark back, and he had been using that spark to fly up to Empty Paozu about once a month to demand that Gine teach him how to go Super Saiyan. Only once a month, because every time he did this Gine would give him an up-close demonstration of the form, and he would limp back to Capsule Corporation in need of medical attention once again. Medical attention Yamcha's girlfriend was all too happy to give him. Yamcha didn't believe for 1 second Bulma was even thinking of cheating on him. He trusted her that much. But it was also dawning on him that Bulma looked more alive arguing with Vegeta than she ever did with her boyfriend. And the realization was like a sucker punch, bleeding all the air, and anger, out of him at once. They didn't break up for another 2 months. But he knew then, as she smiled, and kissed him, and turned to pick up a roll of bandages, that they were going to. Raditz appeared in the middle of the town square and waited. 2 seconds later Kakarot appeared beside him. Raditz gave him a grin and disappeared again, this time to the other side of the world. 1 second, and Kakarot was there. Again Raditz left him behind, appearing on the top of a skyscraper in the biggest city on the planet. This time Kakarot was there almost as fast as Raditz appeared. Frowning, Raditz blipped all over the planet, Kakarot keeping pace with him no matter where he went. Frantic now, Kakarot had only just used the technique successfully for the first time yesterday. Raditz blinked in and out of each location as fast as he could. Mountain, desert, city, forest, parking lot, bathroom, Sariolala. Farm, grassland, temple. That's enough, Master Pabara said laconically. He sounded pleased. In half a second, Kakarot was beside him again, grinning. Olala was pretty mad, he said. Raditz, you dirty dog. Shut up. Raditz shoved his brother, grinning back. You're a monster, you know that. It took me weeks to be able to go across the room. Kakarot shoved him back, laughing. I told you I'd do it faster. Very good, Kakarot, Master Pabara said, and they settled. You are indeed progressing very quickly. Are you sure you do not want to stay and master more techniques? Nah, I'd better be getting going, Kakarot said, digging the toe of his boot into a crack in the floorboards. I didn't mean to be gone so long. They're probably worried sick about me back home. Raditz swallowed. Kakarot meant his wife and child, but he also meant their mother. The more Raditz thought about it, the less he was sure gallivanting around the galaxy beating people up was the best way to make her proud. He'd told himself there was no point in going if Kakarot couldn't go, and Kakarot couldn't go until he'd gained full control over the Super Saiyan form, which he still hadn't taught to his brother. Master Pabara, Raditz, and Kakarot all agreed a good benchmark for control would be gaining mastery over instant transmission, but Raditz hadn't expected him to master it so soon. Do you wish to attempt an interplanetary jump now? Master Pabara asked. Sure. Kakarot said, and Raditz jolted. You can't try it now, he protested. Why not? Because, breakfast was ages ago. Aren't you hungry? Kakarot patted his stomach thoughtfully. I could do with a bite. Your treat. He was teasing, but Raditz was happy to oblige. He took him to a restaurant where the proprietor knew him. The pink Yardration looked up as they entered and grinned. Hey, Rad, it's been a while. Good to see you, Tria. Give us 2 Saiyan-sized lunch platters. Snack-sized, huh? Tria joked, and Raditz chuckled. He led Kakarot to a table and they sat down. Tria was the one who helped me find my apartment, he said. Kakarot grinned. The apartment Olala's never been to, huh? Raditz drew his finger across his neck and Kakarot laughed. Then he cocked his head to the side. You happy here, bro? It came totally out of the blue, but Raditz had grown used to that with his brother. I suppose, he said. I'm not unhappy. But do you want to stay here forever? Hell no. Raditz shook his head to soften his answer. Don't get me wrong, I like it here. The yard rats have been very welcoming. I'll always remember my time here. But, this isn't a place meant for scions, you know? Kakarot's smile faded somewhat and he didn't answer right away, but then their food began arriving and Raditz didn't pursue it. They ate without talking, as was customary, but when they were finished they both sat there, unmoving, staring at the stacks of empty plates and cups that towered over them. Raditz cleared his throat. You're ready. Oh. Kakarot startled as though Raditz had caught him by surprise. I dunno if I... It was Raditz's turn to be surprised. You were flitting all around the planet like it was nothing just an hour ago. Distance is only in the mind, remember? Getting back to Earth should be easy. Kakarot pulled a lock of hair down and began worrying it between his fingers. It's not what I meant, he mumbled. I could do it, easy, I know I could. I just, dunno if I'm ready to see Ma. Raditz leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. Now this was interesting. Why not? Kakarot frowned deeply, his eyes staring at something far away. Raditz, what was she like? Before I was born. Before the planet was destroyed. Raditz answered carefully, unsure what had gotten his normally happy-go-lucky little brother so melancholy. She was soft. She was always mollycoddling me. I acted like I hated it, but I actually liked it when she did that. She'd sneak me extra food when she could get away with it. I never stood up for her when people spoke badly of her and I wish now that I had. He'd never told anyone any of this. Vegeta and Nappa had rarely talked about their families, much less in any detail and certainly without affection, so Raditz had followed suit. He still didn't know if they'd really been indifferent or had merely been burying their feelings. Nappa had had 2 children by the same mate, he knew that much, but only from Zarban's mouth, not Nappa's. Vegeta had always been a heartless little gremlin, but even he had turned sulky and vindictive after they'd received the news. So she wasn't like other scions? Kakarot sounded almost hopeful. No, not at all, Raditz agreed, and then reconsidered. Well, everyone treated her like a freak, and she was different. She spoke of things of the heart more readily than anyone I ever knew. And she was weak, of course. But looking back on it, I don't know if they treated her badly because she was different, or if she was different because she was treated badly. He looked away. He'd sometimes been one of the people treating her badly, and he wasn't sure he'd ever be ready to admit that to Kakarot. Oh. Kakarot had resumed staring at the table. Growing up she was always nice. She made me stand on my head for an hour once, 'cause I hit Gramps too hard. But on Namek she got different. Different? Different how? Kakarot twisted his mouth, in distaste or frustration Raditz couldn't tell. She was. Raditz, it was like she wasn't her. Kakarot looked up, locked eyes with his brother in a frantic pleading that made Raditz feel like recoiling. I ain't never seen her like that before. Like she had ice in her heart. Or, like fire. Like she was angry but cold. He shivered. It was like she was someone else. With fur like fire and eyes like ice, Raditz recited in awe. Kakarot blinked at him. What? That was what the legends said the Super Saiyan would look like. I always thought it was just window dressing, you know. Exaggeration for the story. But that's a little what you look like when you transform. With Mother it must have been spectacular. Kakarot looked at him uncertainly. It was. He said reluctantly. But mostly it was scary. I ain't never seen her like that. She's always so sweet. Even when she got angry it was never like she wanted to hurt anyone. But on Namek she... Raditz studied his brother, who was biting his lip and staring at the table again. You're talking about her fight with Frisia, yes? He said slowly. Kakarot nodded without looking up. Kakarot, Raditz said firmly, and didn't go on until his brother looked at him. Frisia slaughtered our people. He kept us as willing slaves before that. He toyed with our lives like playthings. Is it really so strange she got angry at him? I know all that about Frisia. Kakarot said, frowning. She wasn't. It wasn't just with him. Oh. Kakarot nodded. With Vegeta, and the Ginyu Force too. She was. I dunno how to say it. He folded his arms over his chest. She killed those other two, Zar something, and the pink guy. Like they were bugs. It was like. He sucked in a breath and frowned deeply, brain obviously working hard. It was like, she was talking out the trash. Raditz snorted. She was. Those two were always awful to us scions. It only got worse after there were just the three of us. I'm glad they're gone. Kakarot huffed in annoyance. He tapped his fingers on the table and stared out the window, but he didn't seem quite so lost, at least. Raditz leaned forward. Trust me, however strange she might have gotten, her results are nothing but good. With the heir to the Cold Dynasty gone, the G. Kakarot snapped his head up. Dynasty, he said incredulously. Like, there's more of him. Just his father, as far as I know. But he wasn't nearly so bad. Kakarot jumped up from his chair, his former melancholy gone. But he was bad. He was like Frisia. Well, yes, he wasn't good. Neither of them were. What'll he do if he finds out Frisia's dead? Raditz stared, his stomach sinking. Nothing I'd like to be in the middle of, he said. Kakarot nodded firmly, placing his first two fingers to his forehead. Then I know where I'm making my first jump. Raditz leapt to his feet, clapping Kakarot on the shoulder. Not without me, you're not. Kakarot grinned at him. He concentrated, sweat beading out along his hairline, and with a triumphant, ha! Kakarot made the jump and they were gone. Damn it, Tria muttered, wiping out a glass. That's going on your tab, Rad. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.